Hello, good morning, everybody, or wherever you are. Maybe it's evening, maybe it's super late. Well, wherever you're tuning in from, big welcome and thank you so much for joining me today for my talk all about English. First of all, today we are going to take a look at a brief history of the English language and how and why it seemingly has become the world's global language. And then we're going to think a bit about some of the consequences of this, so both positive and some negative consequences as well as thinking a bit about the future of English, the future of international and intercultural communication, which may or may not be all about English. Spoiler alert, we're all polyglots here. So through this talk, actually, we'll come to find that the future most definitely won't just be all about English. Before we kick off, I'll just briefly introduce myself. So my name is Emily. You probably figured out by now that I'm a native English speaker. So yeah, I also speak French and Spanish. I've dabbled in some other languages too, including some indigenous languages. However, given the subject of this talk, I thought that it probably made the most sense to just give it to you in English. A bit about my background. I grew up in the south of England. There we go. That's where I grew up. Many of my friends when I grew up just couldn't understand why from such a young age I had such a fascination with other languages. In their opinion, actually, they thought it was quite a waste of time because everyone else around the world speaks English, right? So what's the point? Despite the opposition and discouragement I faced, I pursued a career working with languages, and now I work as the languages manager for a language learning company called uTalk. We have an app for learning over 150 languages from almost all of the 150 languages that we have on offer. So if you've done the maths, that does make a combination of languages of over 20,000. Needless to say that the people, places and opportunities that this work has opened up for me has been immense. And so those friends, my childhood friends who used to criticize me for wasting time learning languages, well, they don't criticize me for it so much anymore, I'm pleased to say. Now, I know that you guys must have at least a decent level of English, or you probably wouldn't be here listening to my talk. But does anyone know what percentage of the world's population currently speaks English, either as a first or a second language? According to Ethnologue, the total number of speakers of English across the world is nearing 1.5 billion people. So that makes approximately 20% of the world's population able to speak some level of English. But of course, that means that about 80% of the world, so the vast majority, cannot speak this supposed world's global language. So my next question for you is, does anyone have any guesses as to how many people speak English as a first language? So according to the research that I've done, it's around about 380 million people, which actually isn't that many, I would say, when you consider that there are about 8 billion people on the planet. And let's be honest, the only reason that this many people, this 380 million people, do speak it as their mother tongue, it goes back to the days of colonialism. America, Australia, various countries in Africa, such as Sierra Leone and Nigeria. Now this talk is not political in any way, so I'm not here to pass judgments on what happened. I'm simply going to focus on the historical facts of how the original language of such a small country, England, how it's found its language so much in use nowadays in the 21st century. We actually need to go way back before the era of British colonial rule to discover the origins of the English language, which will help explain why it is what it is today and what that will mean for us and the rest of the world in the future. So, the origins of English. Let's start off with a brief history of English. I can see that my slides have gone a bit wonky there. I don't know what happened there. It did not look like that when I checked in this morning. But anyway, I do apologize for that. So, yeah, a brief history of English. As the name suggests, this language originates from England. However, until around about the 5th century, the main languages of the British Isles, so that includes England, of course, were actually Celtic languages, so kind of variations of Gaelic, which you can actually still hear some of spoken today. So there's Manx spoken in the Isle of Man, and Cornish spoken in the southwest. Now, nowadays, these are basically minority and really, actually, in some cases, very endangered languages. And many of the original languages from what we now call England actually died out a long time ago. And why did that happen? Well, it's a complicated history, so you can also go away and do some of your research. But in a nutshell, Anglo-Saxons from Germany, Denmark, and Holland, they invaded the British Isles between about 410 AD up until 1066. And consequently, their Germanic language took over the years, and eventually it evolved and has now become the English that we know and speak today. You might be interested to know that the majority of the top 100 most common words used in English today came directly from the language of the Anglo-Saxons. And you might also be interested to know that French, the language of the Normans who invaded England in 1066, also left a huge impact on English. Amazingly, around 7,000 words in the English language can be traced back to Norman French, including words like justice, traitor, damaged, prison, marriage, parliament, and prince. So that is quite an eclectic mix of words there for you. All right. So if you've ever travelled around England, you may have noticed that there are many different accents. Well, not just across England, but across the British Isles where English is spoken. And given what I've just been talking about, it might not come as a surprise to you that a big part of the reason is due to the influence of some of the original languages of the British Isles. Already mentioned a few: Cornish, Manx, Scottish Gaelic. Yeah, others as well. More than happy to chat with you guys about them a bit more later on. And you'll also find a variety of accents across other English-speaking nations, like America, of course. But I would say probably that you'll find the variations are less striking and less localized as what you would find here in the UK. And yeah, in any case, history proves to us that English has been heavily influenced by multiple languages in terms of accent as well as vocabulary and syntax. So that's all interesting, but how exactly did English reach the US and now other English speaking nations in the first place? Well, like I said, this is not a political talk, but it's no secret that the British Isles was a serial colonizer. North America was the first place that someone sent by the English nation reached. It was a guy called John Cabot in 1497. And English people were sent overseas, colonizing a great many countries, as well as fighting other colonizers for various territories and generally wreaking havoc wherever they went from then on for many centuries to come. And of course, we still feel the results of this today. So the influence of the British Empire has been huge, not least in terms of the English language. Yeah, again, not a political talk, just stating what happened to help us understand why we are where we are today. And you will see actually that throughout the course of history, wherever colonization has happened, one of the first shifts that happens is language. Just take the Roman Empire, for example, and the influence of Latin. Yeah, so no doubt about it, through language manipulation and control, the empires actually are able to establish themselves and exert their dominance over the local population. I've seen that happen countless times through the course of history. Anyway, enough on looking back into the distant past. What then happened in the more recent past for a language which is only native to 380 million people to be adopted by so many millions more? As I mentioned earlier, it's known to varying degrees of fluency by about 1.5 billion people nowadays. So that means that English is much more in the hands of non native speakers than it is in the hands of native speakers. Take a deeper look at what has happened since the era of colonization, and you will know that the rise of the USA as an economic superpower, as well as the digital era and globalization, has had a huge impact on the world we know today. And yeah, they've kind of gone hand in hand. So, did you know, for example, that 80% of content online is in English? I would argue that these are some major and significant reasons why English has supposedly become a lingua franca. However, of course, there have been other contributing factors as well. Some of these include the influence of Christian missionaries, the spread of the Latin script, and military power, among other reasons. Some other interesting things about the influence of English. So, yeah, did you know that around 2/3 of major scientific papers across the globe are published in English? That English is considered to be the primary language of trade. So, through my research for this talk, I found out that nearly half of all business deals in Europe are conducted in English. And it's one of the main languages of international politics and international education too. So simply put, to get ahead and to stay ahead, the reality is that right now you need English. And I'm sure you guys all have your own stories of the reasons behind why you decided to learn English. And the doors it has, or you hope it will open up for you in the future, whether that's for your studies, career prospects, travel, accessing media, entertainment. So, moving on. So, all of these reasons, all of these elements have added up. And nowadays, no other language than English is spoken as an official language in more countries. So, that's to say that English is an official language of 44 countries. By comparison, just to put that into perspective, France is the official language of 27 countries, and Spanish is an official language of 20 countries. So, yeah, the English language is quite high up there, as are French and Spanish, of course. So, yeah, English is used as an official language in some countries with an enormous population. Let's take the example of India. So it's probably spoken fluently there in India by no more than about 40 or 50 million people. But it's still a really significant number. Okay, so that is how we got here today. That is why so much of the current media we consume is in English. That's why you'll find English slogans in almost every country you could go to. That's why there are so many songs in English, why you might find t-shirts at your local market with English slogans on them. I'll never forget when I did my first French exchange, and one of the exchange students in France, she was proudly wearing a t-shirt that said, "Girl the best, I know," on the front. And I don't think she was being ironic in wearing that t-shirt. Yeah, yes. So I just also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge and appreciate all of you guys who have learned English. I feel your pain when it comes to pronunciation difficulties and the vast amount of vocab that you have to learn, the amount of time, effort, and money it has cost you to get here today. As a native speaker, I didn't obviously personally have to go through these difficulties, but I just want to acknowledge you and congratulate you for your efforts. And I also wanted to say that we can be grateful that the English that we know today is far from the complexities of Old English that used to have many inflections and genders as well. I'm not going to break down English grammar during this talk or give you tips on how to learn English better or faster. But I would say that if you have learned or are in the process of learning English as a second language, I hope you have enjoyed and continue to enjoy it, even though it's really hard sometimes. I hope that it will open some amazing doors for you, whether that's people that you're able to meet, a job or education that you can access, going to new countries, traveling, and other things like that. Okay, so did you know that English has had such a huge impact on the way the world works and people relate and cooperate with each other, that it's even had an influence on the vocab and syntax of other languages? Well, the impact has been so big, I'm sure you haven't failed to notice. For example, in Swedish, more than half of all Swedes now make plurals by adding S after the English model, rather than the normal Swedish way, which I think is to add AR, OR, or ER. And Italian syntax has shifted towards patterns, English kind of grammatical patterns as well. So they use possessives instead of reflexives to indicate body parts more and more nowadays, and also in terms of the frequency in which adjectives are placed before nouns. Maybe you guys can think of some examples, perhaps from your own language, where something has evolved due to the influence of English. I'm sure we can all think of some words that have become universal, that have been borrowed from English. Uh, do feel free to put some of the words that you know in the chat. I'll also let you know some that I found. So in Spanish, we've got the calcsweater, trolleybus in Romanian. In Italian, they say il software. Uh, yeah, there are so many examples. Loan words, Matthew. Yeah, exactly. Um, Cool. And of course, like all languages which are constantly evolving, English has also absorbed words, of course, from other languages. I'll give you a couple of examples of those as well. So, pajama, that's originally from Hindi. Chocolate is originally from Nahuatl, which is an indigenous language of Mexico. So, that arrived to English via Spanish. Candy, I believe, originally came from Arabic. Biology came from Greek. I could go on. There are so many. And it's true that when new technologies or concepts are born, new words have to be invented. This is a tale as old as time. And actually, it's one of the reasons why some languages, particularly indigenous and minority languages, are seen by some to be languages of the past, as they lack vocabulary for modern concepts and ways of doing things. So one such example I've recently been working on is a language of Nepal called Kasunda. There are barely any speakers left, and due to the purposes of time, we won't dwell on that too much now. Yeah, right. So did you know that some languages are really opposed to new words entering their language, which are not from their native language? So to counteract that, some countries have set up institutions to guard their language. So in France, there is the Académie Française, and we have the Real Academia Española, or RAI, in Spain. And I'm sure that there are many others as well. And in some places, some really quite extreme things had been put in place to ban English. One example that I found was in Quebec in 1976. A law came in that meant that you could be fined for speaking English. These laws have since been rescinded, but they are in place for a while. Okay, so I think it's fair to say that some dominant languages, for example, the designated languages of the UN, Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish, are causing lesser spoken languages to decline. But actually, this is not a new phenomenon. We've already looked at what happened during colonization times, and it's true that the legacy lives on. For example, I heard about this firsthand when I was at the Polyglot conference in Cholula, Mexico last year. We met some Nahuatl and Maya speakers there, and they shared their experiences of the impact that Spanish has had on their communities, and why many of the next generation are turning their back on the languages of their ancestors for the sake of their education, moving to cities to earn more, etc. So English is definitely not the only language that's brought about a shift in attitude. But I think we can certainly say that it's contributed to the decline of certain Indigenous languages, perhaps particularly Aboriginal languages of Australia, Maori, New Zealand, Native American languages in the US, not to mention also certain countries in Asia. But all hope is not lost, and there are many language activism efforts where people are waking up to the reality of what we will and are losing, where languages are declining. Now, it's not all been negative. English has, I believe, helped make the world more of a level playing field. It's opened up educational and working opportunities, it's aided travel, it's given many people the chance to migrate, etc. And that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy living here in London as well. I think that it's such a exciting city because it's so diverse. Yeah, other benefits and positive things that have come out of the spread of English. I mentioned the case of India before. So it's really quite a useful tool for them. Not everyone would agree with me necessarily, but to have an outside language, I think, useful because there are so many languages spoken across India. It's such a huge country. Supposedly, there's about 1,000 languages and dialects. And yeah, so that means that no single language there is spoken by more than 16% of the population. So English is kind of the common tongue that can unify the country, or at least enable people to communicate that bit more easily as a kind of neutral language there. And there's a similar sort of situation in Malaysia, where there are so many native languages, Tamil, Portuguese, Thai, Punjabi, Chinese, and Malay. So actually, these examples, I believe they make quite a good case for adopting an international language. Some people would argue that speakers of English in these nations are speaking Globish, a more simplified version of English. And I think that too, non-native speakers of English speaking Globish or English together are probably more likely to be able to understand each other than if they were speaking with me, for example, where I might be using nuances or expressions which are common in Britain, but not necessarily so widely used by the rest of the world. Yeah, so that's Globish for you. The language is always evolving, isn't it? So we don't need to look any further than some examples of Old English, like the first book published in English called Beowulf. Even if you have an excellent command of English, you will massively struggle to understand what's going on in this text. I certainly do. So I can only see Globish as becoming more influential. And as we've already seen, English is very much more in the hands of non-native speakers than native speakers. And unlike France and Spain, where they have the Académie Française and the RAI, there's no institute for regulating the English language. And I personally think it's great that the language is moulded to meet the needs of those who use it when they see fit. In fact, I think this is absolutely essential if it is to carry on assisting and facilitating international communication. I'm sure not everybody would agree with me, but that's fine. So, what does the future of international and intercultural communication hold? Some people believe that the need to learn other languages in the future will be redundant, excuse me, due to AI tools becoming increasingly more sophisticated. But I simply don't agree this will ever happen, no matter how sophisticated the tools become. I'm sure that here at the Polyglot Gathering, we're all on the same page about this, so I won't waste time preaching to the converted. But nevertheless, it will certainly be interesting to see how languages evolve as a result of ever-changing technology, as well as how people relate to and communicate with each other in an increasingly digital world. Nelson Mandela famously said, if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. And from personal experience, I have found that even a few words can make all the difference. And at uTalk, this is in fact our motto too. You can learn the most essential words and phrases on the uTalk app in over 150 languages. And we're adding more languages all the time because we believe that all languages are precious and valuable. And as such, we want to be completely inclusive. And that is why it's possible for all our languages to be learned from almost all of our languages too. So when this talk is over, if you don't already have the uTalk app, make sure you go to our exclusive Polyglot Gathering offer link that's on the screen there. I think my colleague Charlotte will also kindly add it in the chat. So yeah, you can also find the link on the sponsor section of the Polyglot Gathering platform. So do make sure that you check out for yourself, and feel free to let me know what you think of it. I'd love to hear from you. So when you download the app, you can change the source language by tapping on the settings icon in the top right-hand corner. You can choose application language and pick whatever language you would like to learn from. And then after that, you can pick what language you want to learn. Great. So yeah, please do stay in touch. You've got my email address on the green screen there. It's languages@utalk.com. So of course that means that you don't need any English to use the app. And I have to say that one of the things that I absolutely love about the Polyglot Gathering is the no English zone. So as I wrap up the talk section of today, I just wanted to emphasize that absolutely I believe that for me as a native English speaker, it's essential that us Anglophones learn other languages. And I, of course, also believe that non-native English speakers should learn not only English if they want, but other languages as well. English will not meet all of your language needs. That's what I believe anyway. Why do I believe that? I hope that some of you guys agree that learning other languages fosters mutual understanding and respect. And unparalleled insight into culture breaks down barriers because it enables us to see each other as equals and to value each other. We're all interconnected and interdependent anyway. We're becoming increasingly more so thanks to globalization. So learning other people's languages reminds us of this and not only enriches our own day-to-day lives, but that of others as well. In short, I believe that learning languages, all languages, as many languages as possible, goes in some way to make the world a better place. And that is why I know that the future is definitely not just all about English. So that's pretty much all I had to say on this topic for today. We'll open up for questions in just a second. I also wanted to let you know that if you're interested in this topic, I really recommend a book called Mother Tongue by an author called Bill Bryson. He's also written a number of brilliant books, including some really entertaining travel books. So if you guys like reading, then I do recommend them, and you can read them in English, so you can it can help you improve your English as well. So thank you so much for coming to my talk. And does anyone have any questions or comments? So someone is asking, you said that 80% of online content is in English. Where can we find data on language use? Excellent question. We want to check this against reliable sources, don't we? And it is hard to really get an exact figure on that. I can't remember exactly where I found this 80% figure, but a really great source for data and language data is a database called Ethnologue. You do have to pay to access some of the content on there, not all of it. But yeah, I would say it's probably it is the world's leading database of languages. That would be my go-to. Great. Next question. How do you see the future of English, considering the geopolitical changes and the rise of BRICS? Will there be maybe a time for another global language? Excellent question. Yeah, it's really hard to kind of look into a crystal ball and know how it's going to go. But I would say it's a definite possibility. Um, Actually, this would make a great question for a debate. So many things we could say about it. Um, I don't know if English would ever be replaced, but I feel like there could be a place for yeah, for other languages to become just as widely spoken. This is more about getting to know you as an English polyglot. Which city did you say you were born and grew up in? Again, you don't sound like someone with a strong accent. So I grew up just outside of London, just south of London. And yeah, I would say that I have a fairly neutral accent. Some people might disagree. Uh, but yeah, that's where I was born and raised and still live. Okay, someone else is asking, in uTalk, Welsh yes and no are oversimplified. Is this a workaround throughout the app? That is a fantastic question. Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, so one of the things that I mentioned in my talk is that any of the languages that we have in the uTalk app can be learnt from almost any of the languages that we have in the uTalk app. And that comes with its own set of challenges because it means that yeah, all of the languages have to be able to cross over. And so, yeah, that is really challenging for certain words and phrases. And yes and no is one example. And so, yeah, we considered various different possibilities. And Welsh is by no means the only language that has multiple different ways of expressing yes and no. Cornish is another one that I worked on where we really had some debates over how to handle that. And so, yeah, this was the best compromise that we could come up with for the purposes of the app. Okay, someone else is asking, I think probably this will be our final question because we've almost hit 11:45. So yeah, Sarah is asking, might you talk consider adding Faroese? Yes, we'd definitely consider it. Yeah, like I said, we really love all languages. We're not stopping anytime soon. So yeah, we do want to continue adding more languages to the app. So if you know any speakers yourself who you think might be interested in working with us and helping make an app for Faroese, please do put me in touch. So you've got my email, there it is on that side, languages@utalk.com. So do feel free to stay in touch and let me know any other comments or questions that you have, or, you know, if you just want to say hi. So yeah, thank you so much for coming and enjoy the rest of the gathering. And